All right. So what we're here to talk about is everybody up here would like to have a secure border. I think most of us we've always been very supportive of legal immigration, but what we don't want drugs, we don't want criminals, we don't want terrorists, we don't want human traffickers. When President Trump was president, the border was secure. So it's not about the laws. We're talking about a new border bill, but it's not about the laws. We have a lawless administration. The Biden administration is absolutely lawless. You could see it in what happened in Senator Cruz can talk about this with regard to Texas. The Biden administration went to the Supreme Court to say they want to make sure that Texas cannot keep their border secure. Can you just think about that for a second? Our federal government said they don't want a secure border. They don't want Texas to do their job to make sure their citizens stay safe. Now we haven't seen the text yet, but one thing we do know about this bill, there will be nothing in there that will directly impact anything, whether it's Ukraine aid or anything else, if the border's not secure. So if we wanted to have something in there, we'd say, okay, so if the numbers don't come down, the monthly Ukraine aid doesn't go there. Mitch McConnell said, nope, we're not going to have that in there. It's not in there. So we have nothing, and it could be something else, but we're not going to have anything to do it. Now, one thing that bothers me is we don't have text. We're all U.S. senators. We ought to be able to be sitting there negotiating. We ought to tell them what our thoughts are. And by the way, the people back home, they ought to know exactly what's going on. This should not be a surprise at the last minute. And I've been up here 5 years, all right? And here's what's happened. They give us the bill at the last minute. You're expected to vote on it probably that day, and you get no amendment votes. That's not the way the U.S. Senate should work. We should all have the opportunity to engage. So we all ought to be involved in this. Now, one thing that's important to me is we don't codify Biden's open door policy. So they're talking about saying, oh, we're okay up to 5,000 people a day, 5,000 people a day. So let's just say 1%. So let's say 1% of them are murderers, are rapists, are terrorists, or some criminal every day. We're going to put those people on the streets that might impact our families. The other thing is we're hopefully going to have a new president. When we get a new Republican president, we should make sure we don't pass a bill that's going to impact their ability to secure the border. Trump was able to secure the border with the existing laws. Let's make sure we don't pass something that makes it harder for him to do that. And by the way, where's the House of Representatives? We have a majority. I think this is dead on arrival in the House, but why isn't the House part of this negotiation? We have a Republican House. We should not be voting for anything as Republicans in the Senate if the Republicans in the House don't support it. So I think the bottom line is this. If we cannot secure our border, we need to close the border. If we have a president that doesn't want to secure the border, let's close the border until we get a president that actually is going to enforce our laws. Now let me turn it over to Senator Mike Lee.
There's nothing about the current border surge that is the inexorable result of inadequate legislation on the books. Nothing. The president has more than enough tools at his disposal to stop it. He had those tools in place and programs in place that had, in fact, stopped it. But the day he took office, he lifted the Remain in Mexico program. Remain in Mexico has now been the subject of longstanding litigation that the president has lost. Even after losing the litigation, he has continued to drag his feet so that we don't have the program. That program was implemented pursuant to existing law. He doesn't want to implement existing law. So what should give us any reason to believe that the administration that with existing law doesn't want to use the tools that it has already on the books today will suddenly change course if he has access to new laws, including a new law that would give him a new additional tool under the law to shut things down. We don't know exactly what this means, but shut things down once we reach that critical threshold of 5,000 migrant encounters per day. I have no idea what that means because they haven't bothered to share the text with us. But one thing that it could mean is that they'll shut down the asylum program altogether, at least for those crossing by land across our southern border without documentation and who thereafter claim asylum. So let's suppose that that's what it means. If that's what it means, he's already got that power and he doesn't have to wait until it gets to 5,000 a day. Why? Because asylum is not a right. It's a discretionary power granted to the Secretary of Homeland Security. He does not have to admit one person, let alone 5,000 or 5 million, under that provision if we don't have adequate bed space to detain them as we're supposed to do until such time as their asylum claim has been duly adjudicated. Instead, these guys are given the ability to leave, go into the interior of the country with a plane ticket. They're able to board the plane mysteriously without a driver's license, unlike all Americans. And they're told, we hope you show up to your asylum hearing before the immigration court, which, by the way, probably will not occur until the mid-2030s. 6 months from now, we'll send you a work permit in 180 days. By the way, according to the leaked terms of this still inchoate proposal that none of us have had the luxury of seeing, they're going to dispense with the 6-month waiting period and grant those to them immediately. That will turn up the electromagnet bringing in illegal immigration, and it's wrong. So, look, while it's true, I have great respect for colleagues who are working hard trying to fix the problem, and I'm sure they are coming up with some provisions that might help certain things. But from what I'm hearing, this could cause as many problems as it solves, and there's a risk of it creating some much bigger problems that we don't even have right now. So I've got deep concerns with it, and happy to turn the podium over to my colleague, Ron Johnson.
Well, first of all, thank you, Senator Scott, Senator Lee, all my colleagues that have joined us here, and thank you for coming here. As this is being described to us, and again, we've not seen a text, you'll hear that as a pretty common theme here, but our staffs have been briefed by leadership staff. The phrase that keeps going through my mind is Rube Goldberg. This doesn't have to be complex. This should actually be pretty simple. But again, because we haven't seen text, really all I have are questions. These are questions I have that haven't been answered, and I would suggest these are questions you ought to be asking Senate leadership about this bill. The first one, so they've set these thresholds at 4,000 and 5,000. You know, Obama's Secretary of Homeland Security, Jay Johnson, I think in 2016, after he'd already left office, said that 1,000 people a day. When he was in office, he said that was a bad day. Once he left office, he said 1,000 people a day overwhelmed the system. So if 1,000 people a day overwhelm the system, and that is true, that's still true today, why wouldn't we set the threshold at 1,000 rather than 4,000 or 5,000? You know, if you're going to pass something like this, and by the way, in our conference meeting, when Senator Langford, who again I think is the perfect guy to do the negotiation, he's knowledgeable about this, he gets along well with Democrats. The problem is our leader, Leader McConnell, is really the stage manager of this negotiation, and as Senator Scott talked about, without consulting the conference, he took away most of our leverage by saying that we would not even ask to tie Ukraine funding to actually securing the border. But anyway, when Senator Langford was asked, what is the goal of this? The answer wasn't to secure the border, it was to give the next president the tools he would need or she would need to secure the border. Well, that wasn't our expectation. I'm sure that's not the public's expectation. That's important because part of my problem with the 4,000 threshold that's discretionary and then the 5,000 that's mandatory shutting down the border. And my first question on that is, well, how are you going to do that? Do you have the personnel to actually shut down the border and do what you contemplate? That hasn't been answered. But the 4,000 discretionary level, is that going to hinder the next president? Will the left, who wants an open border that caused this problem, will they take the next president to court if he wants to shut down the border at 1,000? That question hasn't been answered. The other questions, we get indications, the negotiators said, this is going to cost a lot of money. And we have indications that it's going to cost a lot of money because, first of all, we're going to have to hire a lot more Border Patrol agents, I guess, to process up to 4,000 or 5,000 people a day. I mean, isn't that stupid? I mean, shouldn't we shut down the border and keep it under 1,000 so it doesn't overwhelm the current system as opposed to stand up a system that can accept 4,000 or 5,000 people a day? You know, we're told that we're going to fund sanctuary cities. I mean, isn't that stupid? I mean, take better care of illegal immigrants, and that's just going to cause more to come. So again, there's just so many aspects of this bill, as we understand it, that make no sense whatsoever. We're asking the questions. We're not getting the answers. You ought to be asking those questions. Maybe you can get the answers. But again, what this chart describes is, first of all, cause and effect, going back to the Obama administration, which started all this, by the way, how he abused prosecutorial discretion. That should be done on a case-by-case basis, but he gave that out to hundreds of thousands of people under DACA. That sparked all of this. We've been dealing with it ever since. And now the Biden administration is abusing parole, which is also supposed to be done case-by-case basis. Up until this administration, is about 5,000 awards of parole a year. Now we're granting it to hundreds of thousands of people. That abuse has to stop. But as Senators Lee and Scott both said, Trump, under existing law, he secured the border. That represents about 570 people a day. Biden, when he got into office, exploded the border, opened it up, and if we normalize 4,000 to 5,000, that's what the chart would look like. That's completely unacceptable, and I just put next to it, this was Obama. That was during 2013-14 time period. This is a level of immigration that President Obama described as a humanitarian crisis. It was, it is, this is completely unacceptable. And from my standpoint, as a Republican senator, I need to know from the negotiators, why is that not going to be the new normalized level of immigration under this Rube Goldberg negotiation? And now I'll turn it over to Senator Roger Marshall.
All right, well, thank you. Thank you so much, Senator Rick Scott, for leading this and for your consistent leadership on this. And thanks for giving us a chance to speak to the American people. My fear is that the Senate is on a collision course for the mother of all omnibuses. An omnibus that also includes Ukraine funding without anything for Israel and without any addressing of the border. And I say that because the actions of this administration and my colleagues across the aisle, that's what their actions are consistent with. And that's what their goals appear to be. And we talk about actions. Let's talk about funding for a second. On July 27th, the last appropriations bill came out of the Senate Appropriations Committee. We've only considered 3 of those. We've had ample time to address those. And that's why I say we're onto a collision course for an omnibus with this Ukraine funding. When we talk about actions as well, I want to bring up the parole issue again. Under President Obama, he paroled about 5,000 people per year. 5,000. Joe Biden is paroling over 700,000 people per year. If he really believed in securing the border, he has the ability to do it. Which leads me to think that his goals are not the same as ours. Negotiating 101, I only negotiate with people that share the same goals that I do. I see this as a national security issue, first, second, third, foremost a national security issue. My friends across the aisle, the White House, see this as an immigration issue, and their goal is to get as many people across the border, legally, illegally. They don't care how they get them across the border. And beyond that, their goal is Ukraine funding. So those are their goals. They seem to be separated. And I think that the parole issue is going to be the deciding factor. Negotiation rule number 2, I don't agree on anything until I agree on everything. I still don't think that they've really worked out what parole looks like. And when we have a president that's paroled 1.7 million people in his 3 years, how can we even talk about any other pieces of this until we figure out the parole situation as well? So we don't share the same goals. Their actions are consistent with a mother of all omnibuses with Ukraine funding. And the only reason I'm at the table is this. Border security is the number one issue, number one concern of Americans. That's my number one priority, is to secure the border, and we're going to go to great lengths to try to accomplish that yet. Thank you. I guess Senator Braun's up next.
Thank you. So to put this in perspective in terms of how long we've been wrestling with this, I think it was, 3-4 months ago, it was the first time in over 5 years that I saw 41 Republican senators come together to thwart what looked like it was going to be the same old thing, something settled behind closed doors. And the worst possible thing we could do is, now that there's urgency, especially on the supplementals, is that we do something that doesn't make sense. I don't know what happened before, but we generally never take part in anything and those mothers of omnibus bills. The last one was dumped into our lap over a year ago, or around then, 4,100 pages, 1:40 in the morning, had 2 days to look through it. We got to have time to sort through all this too. So first time we've muscled enough effort, we got to be careful that we don't lose the opportunity to get it right. I can tell you back in a place like Indiana, it has risen to as big an issue that I've ever been a part of. Generally, the economy is, that's so messed up too. This actually eclipses that. And the parole thing, which I was going to mention, you got to keep that in mind, because that's a tool, that's an example of how if you let them have any latitude, they are enterprisers. They want open borders, and they'll still find ways to get it done. And then last but not least, nobody seems to give a darn about this here, every penny we're going to be spending, we're going to be borrowing from our kids and grandkids. And if you remember, there was a bill sent over from the House on Israeli aid for small figures in this day and age of around $14 billion, didn't take it up because it had a pay for. That's how pitiful this place is. Eric Schmidt.
Thank you. The truth of the matter is Joe Biden has every tool at his disposal right now to close the border. He just doesn't want to. The Democrat Party at this point is unapologetically open borders. The Oval Office is filled with a bunch of gender study grads from Ivy League schools who write white papers on this stuff, and now they have more power than they ever thought they could have to have an open border. They view themselves as global citizens willing to open the door. And the law doesn't matter. And I speak with some experience on this. On day one, Joe Biden, when he came into office, undid two very successful things that President Trump had. Title 42, he tried to do right away, and remain in Mexico. When I was Attorney General of Missouri, we filed a lawsuit, held that up. We had to keep going back to court after the Supreme Court said you can't get rid of this, to force them to actually follow the law. And that worked for a little while until it went away. This is a lawless administration that doesn't care at all about border security. It's not in their DNA. And so some language change now isn't going to create some come to Jesus moment for Joe Biden. This is who he is. This is what this administration is all about. Another example is a border law that Congress appropriated money for, millions and millions and millions of dollars. They were paying $140,000 a day for contractors not to construct it. And then, in a ridiculous auction, in one example, $4.4 million worth of materials were auctioned off for just over $100,000. These folks, they're not interested in this. And so to go through this exercise just to unlock Ukraine aid seems ridiculous. And that's really what this is about. People know it. It's unspoken a little bit in this place. But let's have an honest discussion about that. If that's your issue, bring it up. We've tried to separate Israeli funding, or Israel funding. We can't get votes on that because ultimately Chuck Schumer wants to control this process. And I've been here for 13 months. We have debated appropriations bills for 8 hours. Not interested in that either, because what Chuck Schumer is interested in is hiding this all in a back room and unveiling it and say, vote on this tomorrow. We've been told we can't see the text of this because it's so complicated, because if you change one word here, it affects everything else. Yet we're going to be given a day or 2 days, or God forbid, 3 weeks? This is nuts. Chuck Schumer is willing to throw the most deliberative body in the history of the world onto the ash heap of history because of obsession with this issue, and they're not serious about securing the border. As I said, Joe Biden could do it today. He just doesn't want to.
The Biden border crisis is an absolute humanitarian disaster, and Democrats don't care. Last year, 853 migrants died crossing illegally into this country. Alejandro Mayorkas didn't even know how many had died because he didn't care. When I brought 19 senators down to the border, we saw a man who had drowned floating in the Rio Grande. Democrats don't care. Last year, thousands upon thousands of children were brutalized and sexually assaulted by human traffickers, and Democrats don't care. Last year, thousands of women were sexually assaulted by human traffickers, and Democrats do not give a damn. Last year, more than 100,000 Americans died of drug overdoses from Chinese fentanyl flooding across the southern border, and Democrats do not give a damn. Now, you may say, oh, come on, that's harsh. They care. They care. Somewhere in their hearts, they care about all the people suffering and dying. Baloney. Because if they cared, they would stop it. If you cared about the children being raped at the border, you would say no more. When Joe Biden came in, we had the lowest rate of illegal immigration in 45 years. He inherited success, and he deliberately broke it. Democrats want these open borders. And this bill, this mysterious bill, that is buried down in the basement of Chuck Schumer's office. All of you have a living as reporters. Ask yourself, why have you not read the text of the bill? There's a reason. As bad as we think the bill is, I promise you it's worse. The people pushing this deal knew, no, if the American people knew what was in it, they would be against it. This supplemental bill is a kamikaze plane in a box canyon with no exit, headed for a train wreck. If you look at this bill, the bill is not designed to fix this problem. By the way, the single greatest national security threat to America, this right here. I think the odds of a major terrorist attack in the United States are higher today than they've been any time since September 11th. You know what? In that spike, how many Hamas terrorists are there? How many Hezbollah terrorists are there? And what are we going to say when they carry out an attack here like October 7th in Israel? This bill is not designed to fix the problem. This bill normalizes 5,000 people a day coming in. 5,000 people a day is over 1.8 million a year. That's called an invasion. By the way, under Joe Biden, we've had 9.6 million. So the great Republican compromise is we're for 2/3 of Joe Biden's open borders. We'll let in 6 million instead of 9 million. This makes utterly no sense. And there's a reason. Republican leadership is like Charlie Brown with Lucy and the football. And over again, they run for the football, and over again, Lucy Schumer pulls it away. And Republican leadership lands on their ass. They entered this negotiation saying, we will only do what Chuck Schumer will agree to. He doesn't want to fix this. He wants it to continue. So negotiating with Chuck Schumer on securing the border is like putting Hannibal Lecter in charge of a Go Vegan ad campaign. He might dine on your liver with a healthy side of fava beans, but it's not going to remotely do what the suggested objective is. Final point. Not only is this bill utterly ineffective in fixing the problem, but it's designed to fail. The chances of this bill passing the House of Representatives, I can quantify it mathematically. The chances of this bill passing the House are 0.000%. It ain't going to pass. At lunch, we had a vigorous discussion at lunch yesterday. I asked leadership, why on earth would you be teeing up a vote with every Democrat and 10 or 12 Republicans that has no chance of passing the House? It's not going to become law, and I get it. Leadership really wants Ukraine funding. But that doesn't happen unless you get a bill that can pass the House. The only purpose of taking this up is giving Democrats political cover to say, gosh, we would have secured the border, but those pesky House Republicans didn't let us. It's a good talking point. It's complete baloney, but it's a good talking point. This bill represents Senate Republican leadership waging war on House Republican leadership. It's not designed to secure the border, and it won't secure the border. And that's why leadership wants it kept in secret. They don't want anyone to see the text of it. Republicans in the Senate ought to have the sense and sanity to say, secure the border, or else we're not going to go along with providing fig leaves to cover up the deliberate failure of Joe Biden and the Democrats. They have caused this crisis.
We can answer anybody's questions. Yes.
I have one for Senator Cruz, actually. It's about Texas. So the Department of Homeland Security access to Shelby Park. Texas is not evacuating, as you know, instead deploying even more razor wire. Do you think this will ultimately lead to a showdown between the federal border patrol agents and the National Guard in Texas?
Listen, I'm proud of the great state of Texas. I'm proud of our governor. I'm proud of our state legislature because they're stepping up and defending our state from invasion. Listen, the mayor of a bunch of blue cities, the governors of a bunch of blue states have declared illegal immigration emergencies in their states. That's true in New York, that's true in Boston, that's true in Massachusetts, that's true in Chicago, that's true in LA. Eric Adams, the liberal Democrat in New York, has said illegal immigration is destroying New York City. That's 110,000 people are destroying New York City. I agree with him. But if 110,000 people are destroying New York City, what the hell do you think 9.6 million people are doing to Texas and the other states on the southern border? And so Texas is stepping up to defend our state. I'm glad we are, but the reason Texas is doing so is because Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer and the Democrats affirmatively want this invasion. By the way, you want to know why negotiating with these guys, why they're doing it in such bad faith? They are today, as you pointed out. Joe Biden is litigating against the state of Texas to try to stop Texas from securing the border. Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. is the greatest friend the Mexican drug cartels have ever had. He is the greatest financial benefactor the Mexican drug cartels have ever had. He is the single largest human trafficker in history. Now, that may sound like hyperbole, but those 9.6 million people, when they come over and turn themselves in, they tell the Border Patrol agents, I want to go to the following city, and they pick a city. And Joe Biden puts them on planes and puts them on buses and sends them to every city in America, and Joe Biden is the last mile of the human trafficking network. So, yes, Biden is fighting ferociously to stop Texas from defending ourselves. He is wrong. But it shows that Biden wants this, and the only thing Biden wants next is to make Ron Johnson have to buy a bigger poster board because the chart goes higher. That's all he's looking for.
Can you explain, when you say Democrats want this, Biden wants this, they're doing this intentionally, can you say more about that? Because I'm sure you're familiar with, the Great Replacement theory and how that's been used to justify mass shootings in Buffalo and El Paso, and I would think you're trying to differentiate your position from that, but if you could...
Well, just look at the facts. 70,000 people died of fentanyl. They don't care. So they must be okay with it. They don't care about the human trafficking. They don't care about the terrorists. We had what, 260-some terrorists last year that were caught. We actually don't even know where they are. We did a classified briefing the other day. They couldn't tell us where these terrorists are. We got more crime coming across all the time. So if you know these things are happening and you're not willing to stop it, then you must be wanting it. I don't know why. They want all these people to come here, and there's wonderful people that want to come here legally.
Can you characterize for a minute, there was some criticism, pretty strong criticism against the Republican leadership. I understand concern about Ukraine from your perspective here, but the idea that Senator Langford has been at the table here. Senator Tillis said earlier this morning, he said, if you think that Senator James Langford from Oklahoma is going to sell Republicans down the river on an issue like this, on a rock river, ruby red state like that. I mean, what do you say about that? Is Senator Langford not...
I think Senator Langford is doing the best he can, but he was told by McConnell that you cannot put anything in there that says that we will not provide Ukraine aid if the border doesn't get secure. Now, we've talked about it. A bunch of us, we talked about it at a conference. We said, we want something that Biden has to do because we know he's lawless. So the only thing we could come up with is let's release monthly Ukraine aid if the numbers of people come across the border and go down. Leader McConnell said, no way. All right, so James Langford might be trying to do all he can, but when the leadership is telling him you can't do that.
But address this from the policy side. You're tying that to Ukraine, I understand that, but the idea that there's been all this criticism about what's been negotiated behind closed doors here, that must fall on the shoulders of Langford.
My experience, well, first off, we don't know. I mean, we haven't seen the text. All we do is we read the things you guys write. We've gotten a few briefings. We don't know all the facts yet, but here's what we do know. Why don't they give it to us? We've been trained. Okay, go to the omnibuses, go to the China bill, go to all these bills. What they happen, they do it behind closed doors. They give it to us at the last minute and say, vote for it. Well, we don't really care if you vote for it because the Democrats are going to vote for it, and we'll just get 10 or 12 of Republicans to vote for it. So they've trained us. So if this is such a good bill, then why don't you give it to us? And as you negotiate it, we'll give you our thoughts.
Let me just quick, because internally, by the way, it was Hoeven's idea. John Hoeven had the idea, you know, we ought to have some kind of benchmark that they have to meet if they're going to get, you know, what they want. In this case was Ukraine funding. I thought that was a great idea. So literally had to be at least a half a dozen lunches, if not more. We pressed that point. I made the point that I would not only vote for, I would promote a bill to help the freedom-loving people of Ukraine if it actually secured the border. But this is what we need to do with the law of this administration. So there was a great deal of support in our conference for that position. But without consulting the conference at all, apparently Leader McConnell told Senator Langford, who's trying to do a good job, that that's not even on the table. And we've had that confirmed by apparently Senator Sinema said, well, James never asked for that. And that just, you know, it boggles our mind when the conference, there was a great deal of support for something that would give us leverage that would force President Biden to actually secure the border. That wasn't even part of the discussion. So, I mean, that's what I talk about, you know, the lack of negotiating skills is profound from leadership. So now we've got this with so many holes, and this, again, a Rube Goldberg solution that's not a solution, because as many people have said, they caused this problem. Biden and Democrats in Congress are the root cause. They want an open border. It's a real problem for James Langford having to deal with that. And it's even more difficult when he's getting his marching orders in terms of the negotiation, not from the conference in terms of what the conference red lines are, but what the red line of one individual is who doesn't consult with the conference, just makes the decision for us.
Senator Lee, regarding your letter to President Biden regarding the strikes on Houthis in Yemen, doesn't the president have the authority under the War Powers Act? And as the Houthis are again designated terrorists, doesn't he have the authority under the 2001 authority for the use of military force?
First of all, it's not the topic of this conversation. I'll say just very briefly. I'll say very briefly, there are still questions that need to be answered. I want to know what his source of authority is. Maybe he'll rely on the 01. You know, the 01 and 02 AUMFs have been used as the Swiss Army knife for every conflict out there. And I do think it's important for the president to specify which of those AUMFs are their source of their authority, if they're relying on their inherent authority under Article 2 to repel an attack against U.S. forces or something else. I do need to know that.
Senator, can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Former President Trump won Iowa, he won New Hampshire. If he wins the general election, he'd be enforcing whatever deal passes the Senate here. With that in mind, should Senate Republican leadership be deferring to Trump on this question of whether this deal is good enough to pass?
Well, if we're going to expect the next president, he'll be the next Republican president. If we expect him to be able to secure the border, he ought to be able to see this bill, and he ought to be able to and be engaged and say, is this going to help me secure the border or not? But what we know is he doesn't need it. He secured the border. So I absolutely should we ask him. But on top of that, why isn't the House leadership, on the Republican House leadership, in the middle of this? I mean, why wouldn't they? Why would we do anything that put them in a bad position?
Scott, can I get a clarification on your position, please, and the position of your fellow senators? Do you all oppose Ukraine aid under any circumstances, or would you be willing to consider it in context of a border bill that you support?
I have supported Ukraine aid, okay, but I got a lot of questions. We're going to have a conference meeting at 3:30 today, and hopefully we're going to get a lot of answers. What we're trying to do here is get answers so we can make an informed decision. I mean, I want the Ukrainians to win. I want Russia to lose, but we got $34 trillion of debt. We don't know where the $100 billion that we've already spent, where it all went, what's the plan? We don't know any of those things. I don't know if anybody else wants to say anything.
So just to be clear, your conditions are irrespective of the border side. You want explanations.
Absolutely. Yeah. Right.
Okay. Is that generally the consensus of those on stage?
Look, there are differing views on stage on Ukraine aid, and that's a debate we can have. I have voted for previous bills to provide Ukraine aid. I have also pointed out the war in Ukraine is utterly unnecessary. It was caused by Joe Biden's weakness. It was caused by Joe Biden waiving sanctions on Nord Stream 2. Before the war started, President Zelensky in Ukraine urged the Senate to pass my sanctions legislation to stop Russia from invading, and Joe Biden and 44 Democrats flipped their position, voted in favor of Russia, and 4 weeks later, Putin invaded Ukraine. So President Biden caused this war in Ukraine, and right now today, Biden is flowing roughly $100 billion to Iran that is providing drones that are being used to kill Ukrainian soldiers and civilians. So Joe Biden is funding both sides of the war in a way that is utterly incoherent. My view is that doesn't make any sense and it needs to change. But what we're talking about today is a different piece of this. Listen, the reason this bill is so lousy is because I actually disagree with Ron Johnson on one thing. He says Mitch McConnell's a terrible negotiator. I actually think Mitch knows exactly what he's doing. He's just negotiating for the same objectives that Chuck Schumer has. They both want a bill that funds Ukraine and is a blank check to Ukraine. And they want a bill that has a fig leaf that pretends to do border security but doesn't actually do border security. They're negotiating for the identical outcome. And Chuck Schumer's enemies in Congress are conservatives in the Senate and our House Republican leadership. And sadly, Mitch McConnell's enemies are conservatives in the Senate and House Republican leadership. You know, it's interesting, the shell game that's been played on the justifications for this bill. Initially, we were told this bill will force Biden finally to secure the border. Okay, that's an objective I'm on board with. Very quickly, the proponents of this bill abandoned that. Said, yeah, we admit, okay, this bill won't do anything to Biden. He'll continue to do exactly what he's doing now. But, they say, this is argument number 2, move the shell, move the shell. Argument number 2, they say, well, this will give Donald Trump the tools he needs to fix this problem next year. Well, let me point out Ron Johnson's very helpful chart. Without this stinking pile of crap bill, Donald Trump got the numbers down to here. Joe Biden deliberately took the numbers up to here. And the genius Republican negotiators say, let's drop the numbers to here. Double where they were under Obama. It's not that they're bad at negotiating. It's that they want this outcome, and this outcome is terrible for the American people.
I stand corrected.
Yes.
Senator Cruz, there are humanitarian problems all over the world. Are you concerned that new rules will give future presidents, even Republican presidents, fewer options to help allies in need?
There's no country on the face of the planet that is more generous. We allow roughly 1 million people a year to come legally. I am the son of an immigrant. Earlier we had an absurd question about the great replacement theory, which is really fun when reporters want to be totally dishonest editorialists and say anyone that wants to secure the border is a racist. Well, I'm the son of a Cuban immigrant, damn it. I believe in legal immigration. But there's a right way to do it. You wait in line. And the dishonest reporting that says anyone who is concerned about what's happening, about murderers and rapists coming into this country, about gang members coming into this country, about Hamas and Hezbollah terrorists coming into this country, about little children being forcibly raped. I invite every one of you, come to the border and look in the eyes of a child that's been raped, because I've done that repeatedly. I brought my colleagues down there. And for reporters to dishonestly say, well, you're just afraid white people are going to be replaced by you Hispanics. Well, as a son of a Cuban immigrant, no, I'm not afraid of that. But I'm tired of our government allowing children to be brutalized.
I think we take one more question, and we got to go vote.
What's an acceptable timeline for this to go to the floor, and what are you prepared to do to enforce that timeline?
Mike, you want
Well, remember what happened the last time we had a major overhaul of immigration, or attempted overhaul? 2013, the Gang of Eight bill. We had that in the Senate Judiciary Committee, the Committee of Jurisdiction, for a markup. Most of our markups last an hour or 2, maybe 3 for a long one. This one lasted for a month, about 4 weeks. And even then, we had some lag time between the end of the Senate Judiciary Committee markup and the time that it reached the floor. So, I personally don't understand why we don't go through all the processes. It's my understanding that they don't want to. So I've said, if you've already decided that, at a bare minimum, Common courtesy would suggest the bare minimum that we need is a commitment that we'll have 3 weeks to review the bill with the text in hand. Remember, all we have right now are a loose set of bullet points that we're told that we can't even really talk about because they're not finalized, and yet they talk about them for their purposes, and they convince the Wall Street Journal to publish an editorial saying that any Republican who opposes this thing is trying to score cheap political points at the expense of national security. So I find that kind of offensive, given that they're still sitting on the text. We ask, why can't we see it? And they say, well, it's in a lot of different places. It's not all in one document. That's fine. Most of us on this stage are accustomed to looking at a whole bunch of different pieces of documents. A few of us did that for a living for many years as lawyers. We can do that. No, still won't let us have it. So at a minimum, we ought to have access to the text so that we can read it, understand it, prepare amendments, vote on those amendments, and receive input from our constituents. Now, they've been negotiating this thing, I believe, since October. October, November, December, January. Assuming that we see it sometime in the month of February, we'll be up in the 4-month range. If they can have access to what they're doing for 4 months, 3 weeks is not too much to ask. I've been stunned by how often this happens here. A year before I ran for office back in 2010, you know, the Obamacare thing had just happened, the 2,700-page bill. You gotta pass it to find out what's in it. I thought surely that must be a once-in-a-century gaffe that somebody pulls that trick and people fall for it. I've been stunned by how often this happens. And when the law firm of Schumer, McConnell, Pelosi, Schumer, McConnell, Johnson, and Jeffries, as it's currently composed, puts something together and drops it on us at the last minute, we don't appreciate it. Here, it's not even the full law firm. It's just the law firm of Schumer, McConnell. That is uncollegial to a degree that I lack the capacity in the English language to describe. For them to suggest that we ought to be ready to take this thing, thank them, and then vote on it, I don't know, within a couple of days, 3 days at the most, that's what they seem to think is the norm. That norm is not acceptable. Mature adults in any professional context do not treat each other this way, and I demand that they not do so here.
Thanks, everybody.
Well, yeah, we'll hold 41. I'm asking my colleagues to hold 41. We cannot, this bill cannot move if 41 of us say we're not going to take that.